Will you just take a breath with me? We carry so much of our sorrow and our concern and our joy and our gratitude in our bodies as we move through our day. Sometimes we aren't aware of it all sitting there in us, sitting in our guts, in our hearts, in our shoulders, rattling around in our minds. And it is good to take a moment to acknowledge the pain that is there, the fear that is there, and to know that it is sitting with us and we do not have to bear it all alone. This is one of the reasons we gather. And also to take a moment for that gratitude that is in us, that love that is in us, that connects us to one another and to this earth, allows us to experience through our senses the beauty of this world, to sit in that gift, knowing that we can share that love, and this is another reason that we come to this community. As you move through your day and your week, may you remember to take these moments to acknowledge what you are carrying and holding, and sit with it and know that you are never alone.
Leslie Corn Ash is going to share a stewardship moment with us, and while she comes up, let me say that we are entering into the season of stewardship, and this is how we figure out how we will financially support First Parish in the coming fiscal year. And we will all be asked to estimate our giving to the congregation so that we can put together a reasonable budget. And I should say that it is especially challenging this year, and we are going to be asking for a more significant increase, or we're hoping that you will share the aspirational goals of the congregation. Simply maintaining things as they are right now will be challenging. So stay tuned, but I want to give particular appreciation to our stewardship committee, and you can wave your hands if you are here. Renu Bostwick is here, and Dawn LaFrance Linden is up top, as well as Doug Mooter and Margaret Jackson as well, and they are working hard simply to bring these issues to our attention. And yeah, we've already yawned once in the service, and I know that stewardship may not seem like the most stellar topic, but it is an absolutely essential one, and we somehow have to find ways of paying attention and looking at it with fresh eyes. And to help us do that, Leslie Corn Ash is with our Access for All committee. Would you want
to stand? I think I'll be. So, hi everyone. In 1978, I got my MSW. In 1978, I got my MSW, and I went for a job interview at New England Rehabilitation Hospital. When I got to the lobby, I saw all these young people. I was really surprised. I thought it was going to be a hospital for old people. So when I went up for my interview with Olive Ryan, I asked her about that, and she laughed and she said, "Those are not patients. Those are our new workers who are orienting their first week on the job." And what orientation required was that each person adopt a disability and function with that disability every day of that first week. So, if you had chosen to be a paraplegic, you were assigned an aide who stayed with you for the entire workday, every day of that week. And when you had to go to the bathroom, your aide took you to the bathroom, went into the stall with you, helped you adjust your clothes and pull down your pants, and then mercifully left you alone to do your business. When you were through, the aide would come back into the stall, help you up off the toilet after doing the hygiene and wiping you, because you weren't allowed to use your hands, and then adjust your clothes, and then you go about your day. Now that was hard enough, but the other thing that the new workers had to do in their wheelchairs or walkers or with their red tip canes for the blind was to sit in the lobby. Sitting in the lobby meant that you were stared at by able-bodied people as they walked in, and they would allow their eyes to rest on you. And from that experience of being stared at, that's where the beginning of feeling different and other begins. That's where the feeling of being less than begins. Well, if you survived that week and you still wanted to work the rehab, you had a job. But once you started, you already had an inkling of what it was to be different and other and less than. You had a taste of what it was like to be disabled. I joined the Access Committee because I have a vision of what it is to be different without being considered other or less than. That kind of inclusion is what I dream for all people, disabled or not, that they live their lives fully recognized as a human but not set aside. That's why I joined this church. Inclusion is not a theoretical idea here. It is a practice that people do daily, whether they're in this church or elsewhere out in the community. This is the kind of inclusion where everyone is encouraged to practice that I hope for all the people of the world, not just those with disabilities. The Access Committee is just one small place to start. Thank you.
Freely we have received, freely give. For the good work of this congregation within and far, far beyond these walls, our offering will now gratefully be received.
month ago, I came home from a day of activities and work and made a cup of tea like I often do. And one of the reasons I often make a cup of tea at the end of my day, other than just enjoying tea, is that I always have cold fingers in the winter, and so I like to hold my warm cup of tea. And I was holding my warm cup of tea and noticing that one of my fingers wasn't warming up. And in fact, it felt kind of odd, and I started to notice that it was kind of numb and had a weird sensation going down it. It was my right pointer finger. So I did, of course, what anyone might do to turn to our best source of medical knowledge. I Googled it. And the word that came up, or the words rather, were carpal tunnel syndrome. And apparently, this is related to repetitive motion injury. Now, this finger is my texting finger. Some people text with their thumbs, but I text like this. And I scroll like this. And I click like this. Repetitive motion injury. I was a little distraught, and I ran to my housemate, who was the only person home at the time, and I said, "I think I've injured my texting finger." And she said, "Why don't you text with your thumbs?" And I was like, that's not the point. So I decided I would try texting with a different finger. And you know what? So far, it's okay. The symptoms seem to have gone away. But it was a little bit of a wake-up call for me that my body is not made for this lifestyle. Or maybe it's more fitting to say that this society was not made for my body. But before I go any further, I do want to be clear that I am aware in many ways this society was made for my body. And it was very fitting that we heard from Access for All at the start, because this society was absolutely made for my body that walks and talks and sees and hears with ease. I can participate easily in pretty much any gathering. I can go almost anywhere. This society was definitely made for my U.S. citizen body that can cross borders with ease and a passport. It was certainly made for my cisgender and gender-conforming body that never gets weird looks in public restrooms. It was made for my white body that never gets followed around in stores wondering if I'm going to steal something. It was made for my thin body that fits easily into airplane seats and clothes in mainstream stores. And I want to name all that because as we talk about society not being made for our bodies, it's important to remember that this society was made for some bodies more than other bodies, and all of us in this room have different experiences of how much society is made for us right now and over time, because some of these categories change over time. And while we all have different amounts of ease and access in this society with our bodies, it is true that this industrial growth society, as Joanna Macy and Molly Brown called it in our opening reading, it was not made for any body. It was made for wealth accumulation. It was made for power. It was made for egos. But it was not made for our bodies, nor was it made for our spirits. And we know this, right? I mean, this is something we know. There are so many articles out there about how bad our society is for our bodies. Articles about screen time, how much time you spend looking at screens, and what that does to our sleep patterns and our neck alignment and our children's brains. Articles about how sitting is the new smoking. This is what they would say all the time at the Unitarian Universalist Association, because they were very proud of their standing desks, and I had one of those cool up and down desks. And whenever they gave tours, they would say, and we have standing desks, sitting is the new smoking. So that was cheerful. But it's true, a lot of us spend a lot of time sitting. And it's not very good for our bodies. It's not good for our backs and our necks and our circulation and our hearts. And then, of course, there's all that stuff about stress and how bad that is for us. And we know there's a lot to be stressed about. There's the state of the world. There's interpersonal stress and our families and our jobs and all those notifications and emails and text messages, and it can really be a lot. It's not good for us, this industrial growth society. It's not good for us, and it's not good for the world either, and we know that too. It's not good for any of the living beings or plants on this earth. It's unsustainable. Literally, it cannot be sustained. Our bodies push back. They give us injuries. They give out. They collapse with exhaustion. They get sick. They tell us, no, 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 you cannot push on like this, not living this way. And the earth pushes back too. And many of us are very well aware that we have a pretty small window to turn this economic machine around, or climate change is going to destroy our economy for us, and it's not going to be pretty. It is not sustainable, this industrial growth society. So then somehow we have to figure out how to live sustainable lives in an unsustainable world. How the heck are we going to do that? I wish I had a magical answer, but as you can probably tell from my opening story, I haven't quite figured that out myself yet. But I do have some ideas about some reframes that might help us lean into a more sustainable life. The first piece is about time. We read about time in our opening words, and this theme of time comes up a lot when you're exploring these ideas. There's another article I read called The Cult of Busy, and there's a quote from it as your thought to ponder in your order of service about time poverty. And this article emphasizes exactly what we said in the opening reading about how the Industrial Revolution shifted our relationship with time from a more flowing, biological thing to being about minutes and seconds and keeping on time and being more meticulous. You know, we all today probably didn't even have to reset our clocks. Our phones and our computers did that for us, many of us, I'm guessing. Mine did for me. I just set my alarm like a normal person, and magically it was a different hour when I woke up. My body knows that, but my phone tells me, oh no, it's 7 a.m. It's a weird thing we've done, the disconnection of time from natural rhythms. And so Joanna Macy and Molly Brown, in their book, they recommend that we zoom out and connect across time. That we remember we're in a flow and we're part of a story. That we're connected to past generations. Like the religious leader that Deb Weiner talked about in The Time for All Ages, we have a history and a way that we got here. And that we're connected to future generations. That there are so many who we hope will come after us that are part of this story, and we are just a piece of it flowing through. And another important thing in this time shift is to remember that we are not productivity machines. And I know that far too often I assess time for productivity and efficiency. It's easy to forget that it's all my life. The work and the rest, the time stuck in traffic, the time being hyperproductive, the time just sitting with a friend and a cup of tea. I don't have to always be assessing time for how well it was spent or whether it led to a good outcome. Connecting across time can also help pull us out of a sense that this is all just inevitable, just the way it is, the way it's always been. I was at a training in Oakland a couple weeks ago as part of a 4-month intensive training program I'm doing called the Ann Braden Program for white social justice organizers, deepening our commitment to anti-racism. And as part of this training, we heard from a panel of indigenous organizers from different tribes and places in the United States. And one of them was from the Ohlone people, who were the people who lived in the San Francisco Bay Area before Europeans arrived on this continent. And one of their leaders, her name's Corinna Gold, she talked to us a little bit about what the land we were standing on was like when her ancestors were the only folks living there. And she talked about it and said, you know, it was probably the closest thing to paradise. Probably the closest thing to that garden we sang about in our opening hymn. And while it's not like I've never thought before about what life would have been like before this industrial growth society or in tribal culture, it just hit me in a different way to realize that folks were just living. Like, if you needed shelter, then folks would get together and make some shelter. And if you needed food, you would get together and get some food. She talked about all the shellfish they would get out of the bay. And that really helps me to get away from some of the inevitability in our current culture that you have to work and make money if you want shelter, and you have to do this and do that and make it more effective. This idea that you could just live. She took us to an intersection in Oakland that looked just like any other intersection, but she knew, thanks to some folks who had done some maps in the early 1900s, that it was actually a burial site for her people. A shell mound. That was the practice of the Ohlone people, was to make shell mounds as burial sites. It was one of the few things they left behind because so much of their lifestyle was incredibly sustainable, left very little waste. And she invited us to imagine under that concrete and those cars driving by and those big tall buildings were shells and bones, the people who lived there before. It was really sad, of course, heartbreaking to think about all the destruction and death and genocide that had happened to get us from that place to this place. But it also opened up a space of possibility, a space for the possibility of change, to remember that this has not always been like this and it doesn't have to be like this. I think when we remember that, it can help us take the burden off of the self. I know that I spend a lot of time trying to fix myself, trying to imagine that if I could just kind of get my to-do list a little more well calibrated, and maybe if I got that productive app, and maybe if I change that thing about my email inbox, and maybe I could stay on top of everything and I could do a good job. But it's really helpful to remember that it's not me, it's really the world. It's a hard thing to remember, and I need to remind myself that quite a bit. It's not me, it's the world, it's the systems, it's the society. And I'm not alone in trying to stay in this balance. I was looking at an article about millennial burnout, millennials being my generation, the folks who were born between 1980 and 2000. But I don't think it is only applicable to millennials. I think many of the things discussed in this article actually are true for many people of many generations in today's society. And I wanted to read this quotation from that article because it rang so true to me. She's talking about burnout and the frantic pace of everything and the endless to-do lists. This is Anne Helen Peterson. So what now? Should I meditate more, negotiate for more time off, delegate tasks within my relationship, perform acts of self-care, and institute timers on my social media? How, in other words, can I optimize myself to get those mundane tasks done and theoretically cure my burnout? The media that surrounds us, both social and mainstream, from Marie Kondo's new Netflix show to the lifestyle influencer economy, tells us that our personal spaces should be optimized just as much as one's self-care. The end result isn't just fatigue, but enveloping burnout that follows you home and back. The most common prescription is self-care. Give yourself a face mask, go to yoga, use your meditation app, but much of that self-care isn't care at all. It's an $11 billion industry whose end goal isn't to alleviate the burnout cycle, but to provide further means of self-optimization. At least in its contemporary commodified iteration, self-care isn't a solution, it's exhausting. I resonated with that. When we think it's our own job to fix ourselves to match society, then it makes taking care of ourselves even more exhausting, another thing on the long, long to-do list. And I think another shift, besides shifting our relationship to time, is shifting from the individual to the collective. Often people ask me how I do all the things I do. They think, wow, you have this professional job and you have a young child and you do all this organizing and it seems like you also eat and sleep and sometimes exercise. How do you do that? And I always say it's because of my community, which is 100% true. It's because I have a partner who does all the laundry and a lot of the cooking. It's because I have housemates who share in all the chores and we do our food together. It's because I have friends who watch my kid all the time. It's because I have communities I do my organizing with, and when someone needs to move back, someone else moves up to take another piece of the work. It's because I work with an awesome staff team here where we help share each other's work, and with all of you amazing lay leaders who do so much. That's how. And I think that's how we're all gonna make it, is by leaning into community. By leaning into asking for what we need and offering what we can and taking care of each other and remembering that it's not on us to fix ourselves and make ourselves fit this broken society. It's on all of us to work together. And I know that you all believe in that because you're here. And this is a community of care. And I see you taking care of each other all the time. I see the way you check in on each other and bring each other food and comfort in the hard times. I see the way you work together on projects. And I have to say, no one on stewardship asked me to say this, but pledging is one of the most radical things we can do to combat this industrial growth society. Giving our money to the common good, not paying it to get something in return, not just putting it in for what we want or what we like to do, but for the common good, giving freely and receiving what we need. We don't do that hardly anywhere. That is precious. That is precious, and I hope you feel how precious that is. That kind of community where we put in for the common good and get what we need, whether it's money or time or energy or love, that's what we're gonna need to sustain us. It's really hard for me to actually believe in that a lot of days because so many days, just the idea of trying to get through my inbox seems literally impossible, much less trying to take down the industrial growth society. But when I'm at a program full of 60 social justice organizers listening to indigenous leaders whose people have persisted through so many years of harm and genocide and violence and are still fighting for their land, I think, oh, we can do this. And when I'm here in a community like this, And there are folks like the Pulliams who have been doing such beautiful work for so long. And there are all you out there fighting together. I think maybe we can do this. And when I see the Sunrise Movement working with Congress people and our own Senator Markey and working on the Green New Deal, I think, yeah, we can do this. And so I think if we can keep reminding ourselves that time is not a commodity to be spent to maximize productivity, but is a flow of our whole life stretching across generations. If we can lean away from thinking we can fix it ourselves and lean into community and the collective struggle, we can keep going. We can sustain. For the common good, for making our own days glad, and for the sake of all life on this earth. I invite you to join in our closing hymn, For All That Is Our Life. Let us continue in this lifelong work of building this common good and making our own days more glad, always, always together.